everyone. Welcome to today's edition of the Student Athlete Interview Initiative. I have Kaylee and Jessica here. Kaylee and I played lacrosse together and just graduated in 2020. And Jessica is a GW volleyball alumni. And we're going to call them our Deloitte dynamic duo. So they are in the risk financial advisory team within Deloitte. And they have a lot of other acronyms and descriptions to their job that I'll let them take over. So Jessica, if you could kind of describe what you do for Deloitte, and then Kaylee will go to you, and because you just started there, so that would be great to kick us off here.
Sure. So Jessica Vesey, I'm a senior manager in Deloitte's risk and financial advisory practice, and within that space, I work primarily with our government clients. My job there is essentially to help federal law enforcement agencies to use data analytics to be more effective and efficient in how they investigate crimes and national security threats. So I do that largely across our Department of Justice account and get to bring really fun teams of super smart individuals like Kaylee who have backgrounds in forensic accounting and data science and investigations and help our law enforcement partners do their job more effectively and more impactful.
Awesome. And how many people are you working with on a day-to-day basis within Deloitte? Maybe not your clients, but your team, and how is that built out?
So the team that I actually lead is called our Investigations and Intelligence Analytics team. There's about 42 of us right now and growing every day, which I'm super excited about. So somewhere between my team and all of my partners, probably hundreds a day, which right now is frankly just a lot of Zoom calls. So,
of course. And Kaylee, I know, well, you and I obviously go way back. You had a different internship last summer, but if you want to talk about kind of why you chose Deloitte and how you, just maybe a brief overview of your path and kind of this realm of the government and that type of advising.
Sure. So I actually interned for a federal law enforcement agency my senior year and senior spring before COVID took over. But during that time, I was introduced to someone who worked for Deloitte who introduced me to the whole company, and getting a hands-on experience within the government was definitely interesting. So I loved it, and I'm still getting the opportunity to work with government clients, which is amazing. But I just wanted to see what federal consulting was like. So that's kind of why I just jumped out on a whim and was like, okay, let's do it. So that's how I got here.
And you both can answer this, but if you had any mentors or kind of people you looked up to or any close contacts that kind of showed you the path and said, this is the way to go, this is how you can be successful. I know, Kaylee, we had a few teammates who've gone through Deloitte's various programs, but if you guys want to speak on that a little bit as well.
Sure. Kaylee, kick it off.
So actually going back, I was a criminal justice major. I came into GW wanting to work for the government and law enforcement. I was like that weird kid that always watched 60 Minutes, and I was like, I want to solve those crimes. I want to do that. My freshman year, I took a class called History of FBI Counterintelligence, and I had the opportunity simultaneously. I was taking a class Intro to News Writing, so I had the opportunity to interview my professor, who is a supervisory special agent, ex-agent from the FBI. And he said, if you want to get into the FBI, criminal justice isn't the way. You need some extracurricular armed forces, speaking another language, and my language barrier is definitely there. I took Spanish for years throughout high school and definitely wasn't my best suit. So I kind of freaked out and called my parents and said, hey, I'm switching into business school. So he was definitely a leading factor in the reason why I ended up majoring in finance and minoring in econ, because of the fact that he said I needed to kind of isolate myself and make myself a little bit better than everyone else. So I also, you said, we had teammates. So throughout this whole recruiting process, I've been in contact with a former teammate who is 2 years older than me, was just promoted to, I don't know, they just changed all the titles, so I don't know what her title is now.
Consultant.
It could be
I saw it
consultant.
on LinkedIn.
So she's definitely been a lot of help. I've been texting her with all of these onboarding questions because of the fact that we're in COVID now. So online onboarding is definitely a new path. So she's been helping me out a lot. Yeah.
Awesome. I actually have a very similar sort of mentorship story. So prior to working at Deloitte, my kind of first career was actually also working at the FBI. And I would say one of my biggest mentors was an agent that I worked with out in the San Francisco field office. I was embedded on their squad when I was much younger and, excited about working ridiculously long hours and, excited to be kind of in the thick of things. And just had a couple of really great agents that I worked with. And I had to make some hard decisions about, do I stay sort of doing what I love and enjoying the work that I was doing, or do I really try and kind of, shift and grow in my career? And just candidly, that was a very difficult decision because at the time, those two things did not balance together. And they gave me some great advice of, hey, like, we're not all going to stay here in the long term, because when push comes to shove, we have to do what's good for us and our families, and you need to do the same thing. And so they sort of almost shoved me to take this leap of faith and move into the private sector. And they give me really hard time about it now, by the way, but it was 100% the right choice. And so I very much appreciate kind of them looking out for me from a growth standpoint. And then I think more recently at Deloitte, I was very fortunate and got the opportunity to serve in an internal role and served as the chief of staff to the head of our government practice on the advisory side. And so worked very closely with just a really, really great business leader. And I don't come from that background. Like Kaylee, I was a criminal justice major, and this was when you could get into the FBI as a criminal justice major. So I don't have the traditional kind of business background. And so I got to sit and watch him think through problems and be part of the solution. And he was a very visual thinker. So literally watch him whiteboard out the challenges that our business was. Sorry. And, for me, kind of, I joke that it was like my 2-year, like, on the job MBA. And it's just been a game changer for me in terms of understanding there are other things that I enjoy in business besides just working cases and finding things that I was passionate about. So
That's so awesome. And I love hearing how you guys are still in the same space, but came there in kind of totally different, but also similar ways. So Kaylee, you probably had no idea you're in Columbian Arts and Sciences School talking to a professor, and now you're this killer econ major. And I think, well, you and I both transferred in because I went into college with not many ideas of what I wanted to do either. And I just think that's good advice for everyone who's entering into education or taking a gap year right now because of COVID, that it's okay to not know, and you can end up in these great opportunities. And Jessica, kind of what you were saying a little bit about kind of almost just going right for the FBI in that realm and then going private is also, which is similar to what Kaylee was saying. It's just really interesting because some people do the other way, and it's always fluctuating back and forth. And it's just really nice to hear those two stories. And also, you mentioned about long hours, and I bet you those volleyball practices have you geared up for those.
Yep.
So we're going to kind of transition into the bulk of our conversation, kind of talk about why you guys found yourself in these spaces, not only because you're an eligible candidate, but because you were student athletes, and why you're successful in what you do because of your athletic background. So Jessica, do you want to kick us off a little bit about how you found the positions you were in and how you sold yourself as a student athlete who maybe didn't have internship experience during the school year? Just talk on that a little bit.
Yeah, it's a great, I definitely did not have internship experience. We were, as a fall sport, we got here early, was, kind of tough to have a full summer internship sometimes. I think the values that a lot of student athletes kind of take for granted is just part of, what it is we do, are things that translate so well into the business world. The fact that, for all intents and purposes, you all have had 40-hour-a-week jobs for the last 4 years of your life, is honestly huge. Is it a little bit different? Yes. Are you sitting at a desk? Yes. But the fact that you've worked on teams and understand how to take direction and correction and make those changes, have a work ethic. You don't play, particularly at a Division I level, without having a solid work ethic. And those are things that I think I was able to sort of translate into the work that I do. And now in the position that I'm in, when I see, a swath of resumes come across my desk, like it's not by accident that Kaylee's on my teams. I had a whole host of what we call campus hires, and it's not a surprise that 3 of mine are former student athletes, because I know that they'll come in ready to work hard, have worked with a team, are self-starters most of the time. And so I just continue to see those folks be successful in business, and when they can kind of take those skills that they've learned, and no, maybe it's not, hitting a ball anymore or, shooting baskets, but like you can translate all of that goodness that you've taken from the last 4 years and frankly, your whole sports career and bring that into kind of a new passion. So.
Could you talk a little bit on maybe a specific interview or scenario where you really felt yourself, you're like, the only reason I'm doing this and candidate B is not, is because I'm a student athlete? So something maybe specific like that, maybe in an interview or something?
Sure. So I'll go back to sort of that chief of staff position. It was a highly competitive position. It candidly was not something I was looking for. I was asked to interview, and I knew that there were several other equally qualified, probably maybe more qualified candidates who had business backgrounds, who had marketing and financials. And so when I sat down with Matt, who's still the head of our advisory practice, and he kind of said, well, what is it about you? And I said, well, I'll work hard. I don't know how to do any of this. I mean, I was very upfront with him, like, I don't have a business background, but I will learn. And I think there's kind of that component of the agility aspect of what it is we do, right? Like you may get asked, so I was a libero, kind of dating myself. I was the first libero at GW because it wasn't in volleyball prior to me coming to school, but I had never been a libero. In high school, I was relatively tall for where I grew up. And I came to school and they said, hey, you're in the back row, no more hitting for you. Like, you got to learn how to be a defensive specialist. And, that's kind of what we do as student athletes. Like, okay, I'll figure it out, right? I'll learn this new thing. I'll kind of take the methodologies that come with that and the theories behind it. And I think I was able to kind of demonstrate that to him of like, no, I don't know how to do these things, but I'll figure it out, and I will be agile, and and I will find the right teammates to go to learn from. And I kind of was able to make that correlation for him. And I think it worked really, really well. And now I am that person in our practice that people go to, like, hey, how do we figure out from a finance standpoint when we're looking at our managed revenue? Like, so that was one in particular. It helped that he was like a big sports buff. And so I had no problem talking about the Philadelphia Eagles with him, but yeah.
Are you
so I am not, but I like football, and I follow it. And so it worked out pretty well for me.
Yeah. Well, that's such an awesome connection about the agility and the coachability. Kaylee and I, we played, I think, every position but goalie in our 4 years, the two of us. Seriously, I don't think anyone else did besides her and I. Just kind of wherever they needed us, we were there. And that's such a great little bit. I like the agile word. I've always said coachable, but I think agility is really awesome. And Kaylee, just kind of entering into Deloitte, I know you also had kind of a struggle to choose where you were going to go because you had an offer from your previous job and then to choose Deloitte. So maybe kind of through the choice, but also just the process of, for both of them, how did you use your student athlete advantage during that process?
I think just going towards what you're passionate about. So I was grateful that I had an offer from my last employer, definitely an honor to be welcomed back. However, like we were saying, the network before, you as a teammate and team player, you establish these relationships that they're going to continue past lacrosse. I mean, there is professional lacrosse right now, but not as big. So most of us are going into the real world. So I think using that and using it to your advantage. So like I said, when I received the offer from Deloitte, I actually called our former teammate and said, hey, can you tell me exactly what Deloitte does? What does your typical day look like? Just give me the whole lowdown. And she kind of explained everything because I knew she was gonna be honest, because it wasn't basically a senior manager or the chief of some unit trying to promote this whole position to me. So I think it was good to actually get the raw details of everything. And with my previous internship, I had a soccer player. So I think also using not just your teammates, but a former soccer player was working for the same employer as me. And I texted her all the time throughout my whole recruitment and said, hey, like, when should I expect to hear, blah, blah, blah. And she was more than willing to help. So I think as a student athlete, don't just rely on your particular teammates. Establish a relationship and a community within the athletic community as a whole, and they'll always be there to help you. So yeah.
Kaylee, I could not agree more with that. My very first job out of college, I was living with a gymnast who knew another gymnast who was a little older than me, who got me my first job, where I was also working with a swimmer. And it turned out that like the vice president of that company was like a volleyball player at GW from like the 80s. And when I went ahead and left because my new job came through at FBI with a clearance, I ended up working under a former basketball player. Like, branch outside your team. I can't tell you, there's a great network within GW or within Deloitte of GW athletes, but definitely look outside your team, because all of the athletes that you have in that community are going to know and recognize kind of those skill sets that we talked about, that just being a student athlete that you're bringing to the game.
Exactly.
And I think we've all been on teams since when we could barely walk. And if you still know some of those people from high school or from club teams, really, really great to still have those connections. And I mean, Emily and I started this, we weren't even on the same team. Like, it's just good to have those conversations, even if it leads to nowhere. You at least met someone new and they're in your network. So I love that. And then I guess just kind of to wrap up or keep it going, I suppose, if you guys have any advice to future athletes or advice you wish you knew when you were going through any career change, whether it's an entry-level position or something that you really wanted and maybe you didn't get, if you guys could talk a little bit about what advice you would give and kind of how to really showcase this experience we've had for 4 years. It's really a 4-year job we've had. How to showcase it and what you would advise others to do.
I think one of the things that I wish I had done more of and been more intentional about is the networking component. Those connections that I just talked about happen to be like friends, right? But we all have kind of acquaintances, people we know who, are lovely, but maybe not our closest friends. I did not buy into the networking thing probably until a couple of years ago. And I think particularly given the current environment we're in, where, we're very virtual, you have to be intentional about it. And that is something that I'm now much further into my career really having to dig into, that I wish I had really cultivated a lot of those relationships, even if it's just every couple months, just a note to say hi, even when you don't need anything from someone, keeping that relationship alive so that you have that contact. I think it goes really well for your own, kind of needs throughout your career, your own growth. It goes really well if you're in any sort of client relationship. A lot of my former colleagues are now my clients. And so making sure that I kept those relationships when I didn't need anything from them, and now I do, I still have those relationships. So that's one that I wish I had dug in on a little bit earlier in my career.
Going off of that, it's funny that Jessica mentioned that she actually knows my former supervisor from the FBI. So it is definitely a small world. But going off of that, I think now, especially I just went through onboarding and it was virtual, so it was hard. So their biggest thing was start networking now, reaching out for coffees, virtual coffees if you can, socially distant. But definitely do it now. Now's the time. You're always on your computer. Just even if it's a little LinkedIn message, just say, hey, do we have time to chat over the phone for 15 minutes just to get your name out there? And one of the other big things I think is with that, GW, especially in the business school, has such a stigma of going into the big four. I mean, granted, I ended up here somehow, but, or Wall Street. And I remember coming in sophomore year, I wasn't officially in the business school yet, but I remember everyone pushing Wall Street, Wall Street, Wall Street. And I interviewed for them for internships because sophomore year, it starts super, super early. And I think if it's not for you, then it's fine. I think follow your own path is definitely, I mean, like you said, if I would have known a year ago that if you would have told me a year ago that I would have been here, I wouldn't have believed you. So I think follow your own path, then follow your passion. So that's another thing. Like build your own personal brand. Don't let the people at GW sort of build you. You build yourself. So I think that follow your passion. It just so worked out that I wanted to major in criminal justice coming in and work for law enforcement. And now I graduated with a finance degree and an econ minor, and now it's all tying together. So working with financial crimes and money laundering, like Jessica said in the beginning, is kind of cool that the two worlds are colliding. So just network, build your own personal brand, and don't be afraid to be different. I think are definitely the big three things that I would say for tips for student athletes.
Yes, thank you guys. It's such great advice. And I think what's cool about the three of us is none of us even go to GW anymore, and we're still doing this. So what I keep preaching to everyone is give back, because we obviously were so fortunate from our mentors and people who we were inspired by. So that's the only reason I'm here. And I hope that everyone gets something out of this. And you guys were so great. And thank you so much. Thanks for stopping by, and bye.
Thanks, Katie.
Take care.